The USS Kepler moved through the dark ocean of space, its polished hull reflecting the cold glimmer of distant stars. It had been weeks since the vessel left the central colonies, charting its course toward the unclaimed sector of HFY Epsilon Maintain Amayan, a vast, uncharted region where few had dared to venture. What had drawn them here was an anomaly, a planetary signal, weak yet persistent, that had appeared on deep space scans less than a year ago. This planet, designated Varan, should not have existed. It was absent from ancient star charts, omitted from galactic records, an invisible presence until humanity's relentless gaze had turned toward it. The first long-range scans showed something remarkable. An entire world shrouded in perpetual mist, a thick, swirling blue haze that blanketed its surface, obscuring what lay beneath. But the most disturbing aspect of Varan was not its concealment, it was its emptiness. No life signs, no energy signatures, no detectable movement. And yet something about it sent one shudder through even the most seasoned officers aboard the Ferris Kepler I. On the bridge, Captain Jonas Harlow sat motionless, his sharp eyes locked on the cascading data flowing across the central console. The ship's LiDAR sweeps returned conflicting reports, as if the terrain itself was shifting between scans. Magnetic readings fluctuated wildly, and the biosensors, designed to detect even the most microscopic organic compounds, refused to commit to an answer. At times, they read absolutely nothing, a sterile wasteland devoid of all life. Then, with no discernible pattern, anomalies would flicker into existence. Phantom readings, registering movement that vanished before the system could fully process them. It was as if something were there, just outside the edge of comprehension, slipping away the moment they tried to observe it. Harlow drummed his fingers against the armrest of his chair, his gut tightening with an instinct honed through years of deep space command. This was more than a planetary anomaly. It was a puzzle, a whisper in the void that didn't want to be heard. He exhaled slowly, watching the sensors blink erratically, feeling an unease that even the cold logic of spacefaring experience could not dismiss. Captain. The voice belonged to Dr. Elara Voss, the ship's lead xenobiologist and head of planetary research. She was standing near the primary observation terminal, her brow furrowed as she studied the erratic sensor logs. "What is it, Doctor?" Harlow asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "There's interference," she said, carefully adjusting the feed. "At first I thought it was just atmospheric distortion. The mist could be dense enough to confuse our scans, but that wouldn't explain the shadows." Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Shadows?" Voss hesitated, then turned the monitor toward him. At the grainy, low-resolution feeds you flickered into. A view captured by one of the external drones sent ahead of the Kepler. At first glance, it showed only the expected imagery, swirling mist, the jagged silhouettes of massive crystalline structures, rising from the planet's surface like the fossilized remains of some ancient leviathan. But then, something moved. A flicker, a distortion at the edge of perception. It wasn't them, but it was. A shape, humanoid but blurred, as if space itself refused to define it, flitted between the spires before vanishing into the mist. Harlow exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the console's edge. "We're alone on this planet, Doctor." Dr. Voss looked at him, her voice quieter this time. "Are we?" A ripple of unease spread through the bridge crew, though no one dared to voice it. The silence that followed was thick, pressing, as if the very air had grown heavier. Then the lights flickered, only for a fraction of a second, but long enough for the tension to coil like a tightening noose. Long enough for every officer on the bridge to feel it. Harlow was on his feet instantly. "Lieutenant Ramirez, confirm internal system stability." "Already on it," came the reply from the ship's security chief. Ramirez, a battle-hardened officer with a mind honed by decades of frontline service, was not a man prone to paranoia. And yet, even he looked uneasy. "No malfunctions," reported. "The power grid's stable." A pause. "Captain, this doesn't feel like an equipment failure." Harlow didn't respond immediately. He was too focused on the still blinking sensor logs, which continued to fluctuate, their chaotic signals almost deliberate. In their inconsistency, something was here. Something was watching. For the first time in years, he felt a slow, creeping sensation along his spine, an instinct he had learned long ago never to ignore. "Prepare for planetary descent," he ordered. His voice was steady, betraying none of the quiet dread coiling in his stomach. "I want a full expedition team suited up and ready to move within the hour." Ramirez hesitated. "Captain, are you sure that's wise? We don't know what the hell we're dealing with." "No, we don't," Harlow admitted. "But I'll be damned if we turn back without finding out." The drop ship descended through the swirling layers of blue mist, its thrusters burning softly against the cold, silent void. The crew sat strapped into their harnesses, their breath fogging the inside of their helmets as the planetary surface came into view. Crystalline towers, impossibly tall, stretched toward the sky, refracting the weak light from Varen's distant sun into shattered prisms of violet and silver. The ground beneath was smooth, unnaturally uniform, as if deliberately shaped, rather than formed by natural forces. As the landing struts touched the surface, a silence deeper than anything they had ever experienced descended upon them. Even the soft hum of the ship's engines seemed muffled, absorbed by the thick atmosphere. Harlow was the first to step out, his boots making contact with the alien world. The air, though filtered through their suits, carried a strange charge, a whispering static that hummed at the edges of their consciousness. It smelled of ozone and something older. Something that shouldn't have lingered in an abandoned place. Dr. Voss knelt beside a crystalline formation, running a gloved hand over its surface. "These structures," she murmured. "They're not just mineral formations. They've been altered, cut, shaped." Ramirez scanned the perimeter, his fingers tightening around the grip of his plasma rifle. "So, where are the builders?" The answer did not come in words. It came in a sound, sharp, deliberate, an unnatural click echoing through the mist. Harlow turned sharply, rifle raised. The fog shifted. Something moved. A shape, barely visible, a distortion against the haze, flickered in the distance. Then, from nowhere and everywhere at once, a voice whispered. They should not see us. The mist clung to them like a living thing, swirling and shifting as if it had a will of its own. The USS Kepler. The away team moved in tight formation through the alien landscape, their visors flickering with distorted readings, their comms filled with faint static. Captain Jonas Harlow led the group, his pulse rifle gripped tightly, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. They had landed on Varen, a planet that should have been empty, yet everything about it felt inhabited. The crystalline spires towering around them refracted the dim sunlight into fractured spectrums, casting shifting, unnatural shadows across the metallic ground. Behind Harlow, Dr. Elara Voss studied the erratic readings from her scanner, frustration etching deep lines across her face. "These readings are impossible," she muttered. "One moment, the atmospheric conditions are stable. The next, they're fluctuating beyond anything we've seen. The sensors say we're alone, but there's something interfering with our perception." She hesitated before adding, "It's like the laws of physics are bending around us." Lieutenant Kurt Ramirez gripped his weapon tighter, his stance rigid, his sharp gaze scanning the terrain. Or maybe something doesn't want to be seen. His voice was gruff, but there was an undertone of unease beneath the bravado. Then it happened. A snap, sharp and deliberate, cut through the silence. Harlow froze, his breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted to the side, and for a fraction of a second he saw it. A shadow, but not a true shadow. It was like a glitch in reality, a silhouette flickering in and out of existence at the edge of his vision. His body reacted before his mind did. He spun, rifle raised, and fired. A pulse of blue energy tore through the mist, illuminating the eerie landscape for the briefest moment before it vanished into nothing. There was no impact, no resistance, just the whispering void. Silence. Then the whispering began, not over their comms, not through the mist. It was inside them. Inside their skulls, vibrating in their bones. The words were fragmented, broken, carried on a frequency their minds weren't meant to perceive. They should not see us. A chill ran down Harlow's spine. His fingers tightened around his rifle as he slowly scanned the team. They had all heard it. Their eyes, wide and filled with a silent, unspoken terror, confirmed what he already knew. This was not a hallucination. Dr. Voss swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. That was not our comms system. Ramirez exhaled sharply, shifting his stance. So what? Are we dealing with some kind of telepathic life form? Voss checked her scanner again, but the device still refused to make sense of what was happening. I don't know. The readings aren't normal. Whatever it is, it's yes, but not in a way we understand. It's like we're perceiving something that shouldn't be perceptible. Harlow clenched his jaw. He had seen men break under psychological warfare, had witnessed what fear of the unknown could do to even the strongest minds. He would not let that happen to his crew. We move, he said, his voice firm, grounding them. Keep tight formation. No one strays. We're getting to those ruins and finding out what the hell is going on. The team pressed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispering faded, but the mute presence voice remained. It was like an unseen weight pressing against their chests, a foreign awareness brushing against the edges of their consciousness. The ruins rose from the mist, vast crystalline structures, sharpened and deliberate in their architecture. These were not natural formations. Something or someone had built them. Dr. Voss approached one of the crystalline walls, reaching out hesitantly with a gloved hand. As soon as her fingers brushed the surface, a wave of static distortion rippled through the air, sending a sharp spike through their helmet's audio feeds. Voss recoiled, clutching her head. Ah! There's something... Then the malvision Sauchon struck, not just for her, for all of them. A sudden influx of imagery. An overwhelming flood of alien sensations, not memories, not dreams, but something older, something foreign. A world seen through other eyes, shifting figures, moving in patterns that made no sense, creatures that weren't there but were, slipping between moments, existing in ways that defied human logic. Then, fear. Not theirs, the unseen ones, the ones who should not have been perceived. And then, violence. Darkness. The vision snapped away as quickly as it had come, leaving the crew gasping, shaking, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Harlow gritted his teeth. He had been through hell before, but this was something entirely different. We are not alone here, he said, forcing the words through his tightened throat. Dr. Voss's face was pale beneath her helmet. Captain, she started, voice trembling. I think we were just inside their minds. Ramirez exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. I don't care what they are. If they don't want us here, they should have made it clearer, because right now, I'm real damn close to considering this already a hostile situation. Harlow weighed his options. They had come here to explore, to understand, but now they were the ones being studied, aimed. And whatever, these entities were, they weren't just afraid of being seen. They were terrified. And then, from deep within the mist, from all around them at once, the whispering returned. They were never supposed to see us. This time, the fear in the voice was unmistakable. And then a new sound. A low rumble. A more shifting in the mist. Something was coming. The Varanians did not have a word for visibility. The very notion of being seen was incomprehensible to them, an impossibility woven into the fabric of their existence. To be unseen was not merely a biological adaptation. It was the foundation upon which their entire civilization had been built. Their bodies vibrated at frequencies imperceptible to most known life forms, shifting between dimensions with effortless fluidity, never anchored in one plane long enough to be detected. No species in the vast cosmos had ever perceived them. They had drifted through time as ghosts, as whispers in the background of the universe, observers in a galaxy where knowledge often meant destruction. But now, something had shattered the veil. Something had broken the sacred rule of their existence. The humans saw them. Thrizal, a high elder of his kind, stood motionless in the thick mist that enshrouded their world. His form flickered in and out of recognition, his presence something that should have been nothing more than a trick of light, a momentary distortion in the air. Yet for the first time in untold centuries, he felt exposed. The humans, crude, creatures of flesh and linear perception, had landed on Torvharan. And against all logic, against all natural law, their eyes had followed his movement. They had not merely stumbled through the planet blind to its true inhabitants, as every other race before them had done. No, these creatures had turned, had watched, had reacted. They had disperceived what should never be perceived. A ripple of unease spread through the assembled elders, their collective presence distorting in ways only they could sense. The gathering was silent, yet their thoughts, woven into the shared consciousness of their kind, screamed in alarm. If the humans could see them, then the humans could know them. And if the humans could know them, then the universe could know them. That knowledge was a wound, a rupture in the delicate tapestry that had shielded their people for generations. And wounds, they knew, did not remain unnoticed. Wounds invited predators. Thrizal's mind churned through the ancient records of his species, the deep ancestral memories that bound the Varanians together in a singular truth, the moment they were truly seen, the moment their presence was acknowledged by the eyes of outsiders, their existence would begin to unravel. This belief was not superstition. It was history, etched into the very essence of their being. There had been others before, long ago, others who had once shared the same ability, who had once moved unseen, untouched, free from the constraints of physical perception. But they had been discovered, their existence recognized, and recognition had been there and a throw. The ancient texts spoke of it as a Kaimon's contagion. Awareness spread like a virus. The moment an outsider could see them, others would learn to see them too. The first gaze would be an accident, a glitch in perception, an anomaly. The second gaze would be curiosity, a fleeting thought. The third would be study. The fourth, exploitation. The fifth, annihilation. And now it had begun again. The Council of Elders, unseen by any who were not of their kind, deliberated in silence. The humans had to be eliminated. Not through war. War was crude. War was loud. War left no traces. No, war was not their way. The Varanians did not destroy through force. They erased. They would undo the perception itself. They would reach into the fragile minds of these intruders, dissolve their awareness, unmake the knowledge before it could spread. Thrizal's hollow, lightless eyes turned toward the mist where the human explorers had gathered. Their bodies were clumsy, fixed all in one state of existence, incapable of shifting between frequencies, bound to a singular dimension like insects trapped in amber. And yet, despite their limitations, their perception was something unnatural. They were not the first explorers to walk this land, but they were the first to notice the Hat Watchers. No race before them had ever demonstrated this ability. Even those who had developed psionic senses, even those who prided themselves on their heightened perception, had always passed through this world without a single flicker of awareness. Why, then, could the humans see? A murmur of thought pulsed through the Varanian consciousness. There was something in these creatures. An anomaly, not biological, not technological, something deeper, something that made them different from the others. Their eyes alone were not responsible. No mere retina, no optic nerve. It could breach the veil of Varan. No, this was something else. A pattern, a way their minds worked, a way they connected to reality itself. A curse. Yes, that was what it must be. These humans carried within them a flaw, an imperfection in the way they processed existence. Where other species moved in careful, structured understanding of the universe, the humans filled in the gaps. Their perception was not just on reception, it was interpretation. Where there was uncertainty, they imposed e-meaning, or where there was void, they imagined. Where something slipped between the cracks, their minds refused to let it stay hidden. It was not that the humans had adapted to see the unseen, it was that they could not stand the idea of the unseen existing at all, and that made them dangerous. If this continued, if they spread this awareness to others, if their perception infected the galaxy, then the days of the Varanians would be numbered. Every secret would be pulled into the light. Every hidden world would be dragged into brutal, merciless scrutiny. They would become a hunted species, a curiosity for the scholars, a challenge for the predators. They could not allow that to happen. They see what should not be seen, Thrizal whispered into the silent void. His words, though never spoken aloud, rippled through the gathered minds like an echo of a collapsing star. We must make them forget. The others shuddered, their presence flickering, their very essence rippling as if struggling to remain stable. One by one, the elders of Varan began to vanish, not by movement, not by retreat, but by sheer force of will, by erasing themselves from the perception of all things, retreating into the safety of the Heart-One-Seen Auru. But they did not go far. For the first time in centuries, they would act. The humans would not leave this world as conquerors. They would not leave as explorers, as scholars, as messengers to the wider universe. They would leave as broken minds, as hollow beings, as echoes of those who had glimpsed too much and lost themselves to the abyss. And far beyond the mist, within the crude metal walls of the USS Kepler, as the humans stood, unknowingly marked, unknowingly doomed, the whispering began anew. But this time it did not unspeak. It invaded home. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible, a fleeting moment of déjà vu, a name that slipped just beyond recollection, a whispered thought that did not feel entirely their own. The crew of the HFY Kepler dismissed these disturbances, at first attributing them to stress, fatigue, or the unsettling nature of Varen's mist-laden landscape. But as the hours passed, what had begun as minor distractions became something far more insidious. Dr. Maes Elara Voss was the first to notice the irregularities in their bomb cognitive patterns. She had always prided herself on her analytical mind, on her ability to maintain clarity even in the most chaotic environments. But something was wrong. She had run a memory retention scan on herself, a precautionary measure she often used during high-stakes expeditions in unfamiliar territories. The results were impossible. There were gaps in her recollection, fragments of time missing, minutes unaccounted for, entire stretches of conversation that she should have remembered, but simply weren't there. At first, she thought it was an error in the scanning device, a malfunction due to Varen's electromagnetic anomalies. But when she performed the same scan on Lieutenant Ramirez, the results were the same. Something was interfering with their minds. Captain Jonas Harlow stood at the edge of their encampment, his gaze fixed on the towering crystalline spires that loomed in the mist. The silence of the planet was absolute, suffocating in its stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He could feel it, the pressure, the sense of something unseen coiling around them, slipping through their thoughts like an unwelcome whisper. He had led missions into uncharted territories before, had seen things that defied explanation, but never had he felt so profoundly unraveled. Ramirez approached, his expression tense, his fingers gripping the handle of his plasma rifle, in a way that suggested he did not quite trust the space around him. "Sir," he began, hesitating as if struggling to recall his own words. "I think something's inside our heads." Harlow turned sharply. "Explain." Ramirez exhaled through clenched teeth, his frustration evident. I don't know how to describe it. I know where I am. I know what we're doing. But my thoughts, they feel out of sync. Like I'm forgetting things before I can even process them. I'll start a sentence, and by the time I finish it, I don't remember what I just said. It's like my mind isn't entirely my own. Voss stepped forward, holding up the memory scanner. "It's not just you," she said, her voice strained. "It's happening to all of us. Our memories are being edited." The realization settled over them like a weight, pressing against their chests, making the air feel thicker, heavier. Then the first hallucination came. It was Ramirez who saw it first, a flicker of movement at the edge of the mist. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, an indistinct form shifting between the crystalline structures, vanishing the moment he tried to focus on it. But then, it became clearer. A figure, human in shape, but wrong in every way. Its proportions stretching and distorting in ways that defied logic. It stood there, motionless, its head tilting in an unnatural arc, watching. Ramirez raised his weapon instinctively. "Contact! 10 meters out!" The others turned, but they saw nothing. "There's nothing there," Voss said, though there was doubt in her voice. Ramirez's breath came in short bursts. I saw it. Right there." He pointed into the mist, but it was empty, silent. Harlow's jaw tightened. "Lower." "Your weapon, Lieutenant." Ramirez hesitated, but then slowly he obeyed. The silence stretched between them. Then Voss whispered, "It's getting worse." And it was. The hallucinations intensified. They were no longer isolated glimpses, but entire, false memories, thoughts that did not belong to them creeping into their minds like parasites. Harlow found himself remembering conversations that had never happened, faces of people he had never met. Voss ran a diagnostic on their neural activity and found abnormal patterns, as if something was subtly rewriting the way their brains processed reality. "They're inside us," she murmured. Harlow met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Who?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The whispering grew louder. It came from the mist, from the ground, from inside their own heads. It spoke in fragmented thoughts, in distorted echoes, in the voices of people they had once known, but knew were not here. You were never meant to see. You were never meant to remember. Forget, forget, forget. Harlow pressed his fingers to his temple, trying to steady himself against the onslaught of noise. "We have to get back to the ship. Now!" But even as he said it, something shifted. The crystalline structures around them no longer seemed stable. They stretched, melted, reformed. The ground beneath them seemed less solid, as if it were only a suggestion of matter rather than something real. The mist no longer felt like an atmospheric condition, but like something alive, something that wanted them to drown in it. Ramirez stumbled, his body flickering, as if he were a projection struggling to maintain coherence. "Captain," his voice warped, doubling over itself as though two versions of him were speaking at once, out of sync. Voss was breathing heavily, frantically trying to recalibrate her instruments, but the readings were impossible. Their own physical existence was being rewritten. Harlow's grip on his rifle tightened. "They're not just erasing our memories," he realized. His voice was quiet, but the words struck like gunfire. "They're erasing us." The whispering swelled, rising into a deafening cacophony. "You were never here. You were never meant to be. Forget. Forget. Forget." The world shuddered, and then the first of them vanished. The moment Ramirez vanished, the world did not rupture in an explosion of light or energy. There was no shattering of reality, no sudden violent force sweeping him away. One moment, he was there, his breath ragged, his rifle gripped tightly, his body tensed for danger. The next, he was simply gone. The space where he had stood did not feel empty, did not feel like something had been removed. Rather, it was as if reality itself had smoothed over the gap, filled in the missing space with nothingness, woven itself back together in a way that left no room for questions, no space for grief, no possibility of even recognizing that something had changed. And for a few seconds, Harlow and Voss simply did not notice. Their minds did not scream in alarm. Their instincts did not fire warning signals. Their senses did not even register an absence. The world continued around them in its quiet, mist-drenched stillness, and it was only in the slow unraveling of a thought, in the creeping suspicion at the edge of their perception, that they realized something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Harlow's heart pounded as his mind fought against the weight of something pulling at his memory, pressing against his thoughts like an invasive force. Dulling the edges of his awareness, smoothing over the jagged truth of what had just happened, he turned to Voss, his throat tightening with an unspoken fear that he could not yet name, and saw in her wide, glassy eyes that she too was experiencing the same unbearable sensation, the struggle to remember something that had been erased. The knowledge of it was there, like a whisper just beyond reach, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to take shape. And the harder he tried to hold on to it, the more it slipped away, dissolving like smoke in the vast, crushing emptiness that surrounded them. His breath came shallow, his pulse hammering in his skull as the feeling grew, as the loss deepened, as the certainty that they had been 3, not 2, sank its claws into his consciousness. Then Voss gasped. staggering back as though struck by an unseen force, her hands clutching at her head as if physically trying to keep something from being torn away. "Jonas!" she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with raw disbelief. "Ramirez! Where's—" But she stopped, her lips parted, but no more words came, her brow furrowed, her expression twisting with a deep, terrible confusion. And then a look of horror crossed her face as she realized the same thing that Harlow had just begun to grasp. The memory of Ramirez was vanishing. Harlow shook, his head forcing the name to stay, refusing to let it slip away like a fading dream. He clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists, as he planted his feet firmly on the uneven, shifting ground beneath them, as if anchoring himself to something solid would help him hold on to the truth. "No," he muttered under his breath, then louder, more desperate, his voice hoarse with defiance. "No, we hold on to this. We hold on to him." But even as he said it, even as he pushed back against whatever was unraveling their minds, he could feel the relentless pull of something ancient and unfathomable, something that had no form and no name, but held dominion over the very fabric of perception. It was undoing them. The mist around them deepened, thickening with unnatural intent, shifting not like fog stirred by the wind, but like something alive, something conscious, something curling with malevolent purpose, seeking to smother, to erase, to rewrite reality itself. The crystalline spires that surrounded them trembled, their once solid forms rippling, stretching, melting into shapes that defied logic, as if the world were rejecting their presence, refusing to acknowledge their existence, closing itself off from their intrusion. The very ground beneath their feet no longer felt stable. It trembled, subtly at first, then more violently as though they were walking on something that was not truly there, something that was already in the process of being forgotten. Then came the voices. "You were never meant to be. You were never meant to see. Forget, forget, forget." Harlow's head pounded as the whispers slithered through the air, into his thoughts, into his very sense of self, pressing against his mind like an external force that did not belong yet, had absolute dominion over the way he perceived reality. The words were not spoken, so much as they were imprinted directly onto his consciousness, rewriting the narrative of his own past, rewriting the moment that had just happened, convincing his brain that Ramirez had never been there at all. But he fought against it. He gritted his teeth, clenching his fists until his nails dug into his palms, using the pain as an anchor, holding onto the name, onto the reality of it. Even as the force trying to unmake it pushed harder, Voss was trembling beside him, her hands still on her head, as if she were physically trying to keep herself from dissolving, as if she could feel the threads of her own being unraveling. Then suddenly, she stumbled, her entire body flickering, just for a moment, just like Ramirez had before he disappeared. Harlow moved on instinct, grabbing her, yanking her forward, forcing her to keep moving. "Run!" He barked, his voice raw, his body reacting before his mind could even process what was happening. He didn't need to think, didn't need to plan. They had to get to the ship. But the distance to the Kepler stretched impossibly before them. 50 meters became 100. 100 became 1,000. No matter how fast they moved, no matter how hard they pushed forward, the ramp remained just beyond reach, an illusion of salvation that the universe refused to grant them. Harlow's breath was ragged, his muscles burning, his mind screaming against the pressure of something trying to erase them from existence. But he did not stop. He refused to stop. Humans were not meant to be forgotten. He reached for the pulse grenade on his belt, his fingers closing around the cool metal. A last resort, a desperate gamble, a burst of electromagnetic disruption designed to overload sensory fields and scramble perception itself. He had no idea if it would work, no idea if it would do anything against a force that did not operate within the rules of physics, but he had nothing left to lose. He activated it. The third pulse detonated. A shockwave of disruptive energy, cascading outward. The mist screamed. The crystalline towers shuddered, their forms distorting violently as if something was recoiling in pain. The whispers snapped into silence. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, the air around them felt still. And then, suddenly, the Kepler was right in front of them. No more shifting distances, no more tricks. The houses lunged for the ramp, dragging themselves inside, just as the hatch sealed behind them, cutting them off from the planet and whatever had tried to consume them. The ship roared to life, its engines firing, tearing away from Varens, grasp, and below them. The planet vanished. Not physically, not in a way that could be explained. It simply ceased to be. Voss collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. Harlow stood frozen, staring into the empty void, where a planet had been, where a person had stood, where something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Then Voss spoke, her voice trembling, a whisper that sent ice through his veins. Jonas. Who's Ramirez? And Harlow realized he didn't know. The memory had been erased, but something had survived, and somewhere, something still remembered them.